Few horrors from the past 25 years can claim to have had as much of an impact on the horror genre as Scream. This was a movie that stared at the formulaic tropes and conventions of the horror genre in general, gave them a hearty laugh, and then decided to breathe new life into the slasher subgenre and change it forever. Two key components to the success of a horror mystery movie, of course, are the amount of bodies that have piled up and having a killer twist to wrap everything up. The twist here, of course, is that there are two Ghostface killers, one being Skeet Ulrich's Billy and the other being Matthew Lillard's Stu. And the kill count between them is quite impressive. However, given that both killers are adorned head to toe in Ghostface garb, it can be a bit difficult to figure out which killer killed which victim. Adding to that is the fact that in Scream 3 it's also revealed that Roman Bridger had a hand in the events of Scream 1, which makes things a little bit more confusing as well. So, for those of you out there contemplating who was responsible for each death in Scream, I absolutely have you covered. Number 7, Steve Orth. Here is a fun fact for you. Did you know that Kevin Patrick Walls, who plays Steve Orth, was actually originally up for the role of Billy Loomis? While he of course ultimately lost out to Skeet Ulrich, he was still cast in the movie, albeit in a much smaller part. The boyfriend of Drew Barrymore's Casey Becker, we don't actually get to see much from Steve in this movie, but his opening kill does set the tone for this film and kind of the series in general. Steve is the very first person we get to see killed in this franchise, and it's the first time we get to see just how devilish and brutal Ghostface can be. Gagged and taped to a chair, Steve's fate is left in the hands of Casey, and more importantly, her knowledge of horror movies. When she incorrectly guesses that Jason Voorhees was the killer in the first Friday the 13th movie, which we all know was Pamela Voorhees and not her son, she signs his death warrant. Stabbed, slashed, and turned into a gutted piece of patio furniture, Steve bites the bullet faster than you can ask. What's your favorite scary movie? The person under the mask for this particular kill, though, is Stu, as confirmed by the filmmakers. With Billy's Ghostface at this point more concerned about what's going on inside the house with Casey, it's left up to Stu to finish this guy off. Number 6, Casey Becker. I just mentioned that Steve Orth was kind of the tone setter for the entire Scream franchise to come, but he was more like the opening act or a starter to the main course. That was Casey Becker. With Drew Barrymore being billed as the headline act on all of Scream's pre-release material at the time, it was a huge shock to see her killed off in just 15 minutes. It immediately let the audience know that this was a horror film unlike anything they'd ever seen, and that all their bets were off. So, who was the person behind this iconic death? Well, the simple answer is that it was Stu, but there is a little bit more going on than this. As Casey gets tormented by an eerie caller, it's Stu who was actually on the phone to her here. He wasn't operating alone, of course, and Billy is the first Ghostface that she actually physically encounters in the house. After those two scuffle and Casey makes her big run for freedom, it's then that Stu's Ghostface appears and stabs her in the back before leaving Casey's gutted corpse hanging from a nearby tree. And in terms of added incentive and motive, it's later revealed that Stu is actually Casey's ex-boyfriend. And with that, the table was set to establish Scream as a horror franchise unlike anything else at the time. Number 5, Principal Himbry. Upon first watch of Scream, it is all kinds of fun to see the Fonz of all people, Henry Winkler himself, turn up in a slasher movie. For a certain generation, an appearance by the former Fonz in anything is enough to put a smile on their face. Unfortunately though for them, that smile was quickly going to be rubbed off because this character's time in this movie was absolutely numbered. Following the lead of Casey Becker's death, Principal Himbry is similarly gutted and left hanging for all of the students to see. Unlike Casey being hung from a tree though, the principal is actually strapped up to the football posts for the whole student body. Now, logic suggests that it was actually Billy here who was responsible for this death. With Stu at that point busy arranging his big house party, that makes Billy the prime candidate to have offed Principal Himbry and left his corpse hanging in the most public and visible of ways. There's actually more to this death though than the principal being another dead body for the sake of having another dead body in this movie. That's because his demise and the subsequent displaying of his body so publicly is the thing that gets all of the students to leave Stu's house and run scared, leaving the two Ghostface killers left with only Sidney, and a handful of other characters. Number 4. Tatum Riley. When it comes to imaginative horror kills, Death by Cat Flap is certainly up there. There was, of course, a little bit more to it than that, but the demise of Rose McGowan's Tatum in this movie is certainly one of the most iconic sequences and the most parodied sequences in the entire thing. After being confronted in Stu's garage, the only way that Tatum can escape the confines of this situation is out through the cat flap. And to be fair, she does manage to get halfway through the garage door. That is until one of the Ghostface killers lifts it up and snaps her neck in the process. Again, it's not made abundantly clear which of the two did the killing here, but I think it's an educated guess to assume that it was Billy who was responsible for this specific victim. After all, Stu is a pretty prominent presence in all of the house party scenes, and it's kind of unlikely that he would slip off to do something as heavy as kill his current girlfriend. I mean, the dude is mad and deranged, but I genuinely don't think he has the time to slip away and do all of this. As such, it seems as though Billy was responsible for this creative death. This is supported by Loomis then immediately turning up at the party and giving Stu a knowing nod as if to confirm what he's just done. Number 3. Kenny Jones. Played by W. Earl Brown, Kenny Jones was Gale Weathers' original cameraman in the very first Scream movie. Like most people featured in this movie though, Kenny was ultimately doomed to pop up on body count lists like this forevermore. And in terms of who killed Kenny, that's actually one of the more clear cut in the entire franchise. That's because at the time, Billy had been fake killed by Stu as part of the Ghostface's grand plan, so it means that he couldn't have actually performed this murder as he was pretending to not be alive. And while Gale would later play up the fact that Kenny was gutted in her book and in her subsequent interviews, in reality he actually had his throat slit. In his final moments he did help Sidney get to temporary safety, but then his corpse was placed on top of Gale Weathers' van. And then later on that dead body falls onto the windscreen of the van when Gale is trying to make her escape. It's the weirdest trap ever and I can't believe it worked, but you know, props for creativity, I guess. Now, Kenny might have just been a minor character in the first Scream, but his role is one that's constantly called back to and referenced as the series goes on. And that's because every time Gale Weathers gets a new cameraman, they always have a sense of trepidation about taking the job, because historically, it's not come with the best job security. And by that, I mean a Ghostface killer will probably slice your neck and then throw you on top of a van and leave you for dead. I wouldn't be taking that job anyway. Number 2. Maureen Prescott. Maureen Prescott was only a fleeting presence in the original Scream movie, but obviously she's a huge part of the overall puzzle for those first 3 flicks in particular. That's because she was the very first victim of the Ghostface killers and was killed 1 year prior to the events of the first movie. It was only in Scream 3 though that we got the exact details of how Maureen died and who was responsible. As revealed by Maureen's abandoned son Roman, it was he who had orchestrated that death after he was rejected by Maureen when trying to start up a mother-son relationship. Angry at her and at Sidney for the life that she had and he didn't, he then set up his plan to get revenge. The plan would see Sidney's long-lost brother get into the ear of Billy Loomis and inform him that his father was having an affair with Maureen, which subsequently led to the breakup of his family. Not only did Roman give him this information though, but he also gave Billy the tip to get someone else involved in his murderous plan with him, so he would have some kind of fall guy to take all the blame and let him get away. And that's where Stu came into the fold, with Billy convincing him to get in on the murder of Maureen and help him kill this woman. Framing Cotton Weary for the murder of Maureen, it was actually Stu and Billy who partook in the sexual assault and murder of Sidney's mother. Number 1. Stu and Billy. With the cat well and truly out of the bag by the film's climax, there's no guesswork needed to figure out who killed Stu and who killed Billy by the end of the first Scream, but you know, we can't do a video about all the victims and not include them, especially when their deaths are so glorious. After Billy's initial death was revealed to have been a facade, he would finally get to meet his maker for real by the time Scream came to an end. But before Billy made his big exit out of the franchise, it was actually Stu who was the first of the 2 killers to get offed. And the dude went out in style, having a TV, you know, one of those big chunky CRT models from the time, just having that fall straight on his head. Of course, that was courtesy of Sidney, who would then go on to incapacitate Billy. A tussle with her left Billy seemingly dead as a dodo, but the ever-smart Randy did point out that in horror movies like Scream, the killer is never dead at first glance. He always comes back for one more act of revenge. Having caused so much bloodshed and torment throughout Scream, Stu and Billy fell afoul of Sidney and Gale respectively when it came to crunch time. So for now, both of these killers are dead, but hey, who knows, this is Scream after all, and there are some rumors doing the rounds that Stu himself might be returning for Scream 5, so who knows, maybe I'll have to come back and revise this list in a few months' time.